The void shields over the Imperial Palace screamed under the pressure of a new gravity pull. It was not an attack fleet. It was a planet. In the dark future, there is usually only war, but this was different. A world of bright oceans and white clouds tore through the skin of reality. It appeared right next to Holy Terror. The gravity waves from the sudden arrival killed millions instantly in the crowded hive cities below. Tall towers crumbled into dust. The dark oceans of terror boiled from the sudden shift in orbit. On the bridge of the massive star-fort phalanx, the Imperial fists looked at their scanners in horror. They did not see the chaotic energy of demons. They saw a planet that looked like ancient history. It looked like terror before the ruin. It looked like hope, but the Imperium does not trust hope. On the new planet, the heroes looked up. Superman floated above the city of Metropolis. He saw the gold ships of the Imperium filling the space around them. He heard the radio signals. They were not greetings. They were prayers for death and commands to surrender. The Justice League gathered at their station in orbit. Batman studied the massive Gothic ships. He saw the guns the size of cities. He saw the skulls painted on the armor. He knew this was not an invasion they could simply fight. This was a collision of two entire realities. The physics of their world felt wrong. The air tasted like old metal and fear. The High Lords of Terror met in their dark chamber. They declared the new planet a trick of the dark gods. They did not wait for talks. Fear rules the Imperium. If a thing is unknown, it must be destroyed. The order went out to the battle fleet Solar. They turned their giant cannons toward the blue world. They prepared the torpedoes that burn atmosphere. They believed they were saving their souls from a trap. They were about to start a war that would burn both universes. The Man of Steel flew up to meet the first wave of ships. He did not know that in this universe being a god is a crime. The first lance strike fired. It was a beam of pure light meant to crack continents. Superman caught it in his hand. The war had begun. The alarms on the Justice League watchtower screamed. It was a sound no one had ever heard before. The sensors did not show an invasion fleet entering the solar system. They showed an entire planet appearing out of nowhere. It popped into existence right next to the Earth. The new planet was the same size as Earth. It was in the same orbit, but it looked dead. The oceans were gone or boiled away. The clouds were brown and grey. The cities were not made of glass and steel. They were made of black stone and iron. They covered the whole surface. It was a hive world. It was Holy Terror. The gravity hit first. Two planets cannot exist so close together without disaster. The moon was pulled in two directions. On the DC Earth, the oceans rose up in waves 1,000 feet high. In Metropolis, the ground shook. Windows shattered in every building. People ran into the streets screaming. They looked up at the sky. They did not see the sun. They saw the bottom of a giant dirty planet hanging over them. It blocked the light. It looked like a ceiling made of nightmares. On Holy Terror, the damage was worse. The old structures were weak. The gravity pull from the blue earth cracked the foundations of the hive cities. Towers that had stood for 10,000 years fell down. They crushed millions of people in an instant. The dust clouds rose up and choked the air. The pilgrims standing at the gates of the Imperial Palace were crushed by falling statues. The bells of the churches rang wildly. The ground did not stop shaking. In the High Council Room on Terra, the High Lords screamed at each other. The fabric of reality was tearing. They did not look at scientific data. They looked at old books of prophecy. They believed this was a trick by the great enemy. They thought the blue planet was a demon world sent to tempt them. The master of the Navy slammed his fist on the table. He did not ask for peace. He demanded permission to fire. The Imperium does not talk to strangers. It kills them before they can speak. The order was given. The battle fleet solar began to move. Superman floated in space between the two worlds. He felt the gravity pulling at his cape. He used his supervision to look at the new planet. He saw the suffering. He saw billions of people living in squalor. He saw slaves pulling giant chains. He saw people eating recycled paste. But then he saw the ships. They were rising from the dark side of the dead planet. They were ugly and shaped like cathedrals. They were gold and black. They were not aerodynamic. They were brute force made of metal. The front of each ship had a massive armored prow. They looked like battering rams. Batman spoke over the radio. His voice was calm but tight. He told the League that the other planet was broadcasting a signal. It was not a language they knew well. It was a mix of Latin and code. It was a prayer. They were chanting about purging the unclean. They were chanting about burning the witch. Batman warned that the ships were charging their weapons. He detected energy spikes that could boil an ocean. Superman flew toward the lead ship. It was the Retribution-class battleship called the Cardinal Boras. It was 8 kilometers long. It was covered in statues of weeping angels and skulls. Superman raised his hand. He broadcasted a message of peace on all frequencies. He said he was a friend. He said they did not want to fight. On the bridge of the Cardinal Boras, the Lord Admiral heard the voice. He did not hear a friend. He heard an alien. He saw a man flying in the void without a helmet. This was impossible for a human. Therefore, the man was a mutant or a demon. The Admiral did not hesitate. He ordered the gunnery crews to fire the lance batteries. He did not care that the man was small. He wanted to erase the stain from the void. The ship shook as the weapon fired. A beam of pure energy shot out. It was hot enough to crack the crust of a planet. It hit Superman in the chest. The Man of Steel was pushed back. The heat was intense. It was not like the lasers he knew. This beam felt angry. It pushed him backward a mile, but he did not burn. He flew forward again. He was unhurt. The crew on the bridge gasped. They made the sign of the Aquila on their chests. They had never seen anything survive a lance strike. The Admiral yelled at them. He called them cowards. He ordered the macro cannons to fire. These were not lasers. They were giant guns that shot shells the size of office buildings. The shells were loaded by thousands of slaves pulling chains. The slaves died of radiation and exhaustion just to load one shot. The shells flew toward Earth. Green Lantern created a wall of green energy in space. The shells hit the wall. The explosion was silent in the vacuum, but the light was blinding. The force cracked the green shield. Hal Jordan gritted his teeth. He had stopped asteroids before. He had stopped alien armadas. But these shells were heavy. They had mass and speed that defied logic. Behind the first wave of ships, he saw more. There were thousands of them. The sheer number of guns pointing at Earth was impossible to count. Wonder Woman and Aquaman were on the surface of DC Earth. They were trying to save the cities from the water. Aquaman pushed back a tidal wave that threatened to drown New York. He felt the water of the other planet calling to him. He reached out with his mind to the oceans of terror. He recoiled in horror. The oceans there were dead. There were no fish. There was only sludge and poison. The water spirits were gone. He told Wonder Woman that the people of the other world had killed their own nature. Wonder Woman looked up at the sky. She saw the flashes of light. She knew this was war. Back in space, Superman realized talking would not work. He had to disable the lead ship. He flew faster than light. He dodged the incoming fire. He reached the hull of the Cardinal Boras. He punched a hole through the thick armor. He flew inside. The inside of the ship was like a nightmare. It was dark and cold. The air smelled of incense and rotting meat. Superman flew through the corridors. He saw the crew. They were not soldiers like he knew. They looked like monks mixed with soldiers. Many of them had mechanical parts. Some had replaced their eyes with red lenses. Some had replaced their arms with tools. Then he saw the servitors. He stopped. He hovered in the hallway. He saw a man who had been turned into a door opener. The man had no legs. He was wired into the wall. His brain was lobotomized. He just stared blankly. Superman used his X-ray vision. He saw that the man was once normal. This had been done to him on purpose. It was not an accident. It was a punishment or a job. Superman felt sick. This was not just an enemy. This was a cruelty he could not understand. Security teams ran into the hallway. They were Imperial Navy breachers. They carried shotguns and shields. They saw the flying man in the blue suit. They screamed hate at him. They called him a witch. They opened fire. The bullets bounced off Superman's chest. He looked at them with pity. He told them to stop. He used his freeze breath to trap them in ice. He did not hurt them. He just wanted to pass. He reached the bridge. The heavy blast doors were made of adamantium. Superman ripped them off their hinges. He floated into the command center. The Lord Admiral stood on his podium. He was an old man with scars on his face. He wore a high collar and medals. He pulled a bolt pistol and fired at Superman. The explosive round hit Superman's eye and shattered. Superman did not blink. Superman floated closer. He demanded the Admiral stand down. He said they could help repair the ships. He said they had food and medicine. The Admiral looked at him with pure hate. The Admiral believed that accepting help from a mutant was a sin worse than death. The Admiral pressed a button on his command throne. It was a scuttling charge. He intended to blow up the bridge and kill them both. Superman moved too fast. He grabbed the Admiral's hand. He crushed the device before it could trigger. He looked into the Admiral's eyes. He asked why they wanted to die. The Admiral spat at him. He said that humanity must be pure to survive the dark. He said Superman was a lie. While this happened, the Adeptus Mechanicus was watching. On a different ship, a tech priest named Magus Vorka studied the sensors. He was looking at the watchtower. He did not care about the war. He cared about the technology. He saw the teleporters used by the Justice League. He saw the cyborg body of Victor Stone. The Magos felt a cold greed in his logic circuits. This technology was forbidden, but he wanted it. It was ancient and powerful. He believed it belonged to the machine god. He sent a signal to his personal Skitarii troops. He told them to board the station. Cyborg was alone in the monitor room of the watchtower. He was trying to hack the Imperial network. It was difficult. The Imperial computers were not digital. They were biological. They used human brains as processors. It was disgusting and slow. But the encryption was based on dead languages and religious codes. Suddenly, the wall behind him melted. Termites burst through the hull. These were drilling machines used by the Mechanicus. The doors opened. Skitarii Rangers poured out. They were soldiers in red robes. Their legs were metal. Their faces were covered by masks with tubes. They held radium rifles. They did not speak. They emitted a burst of static noise. This was their battle cry. Cyborg transformed his arm into a sonic cannon. He yelled a warning. The Skitarii fired. Their bullets were radioactive. They hit Cyborg's armor. The radiation alarms in his system went off. He fired back. The sonic blast threw the soldiers against the wall. But they did not feel pain. They got up and kept shooting. They were programmed to capture him. They wanted to dissect him to see how he worked. Batman arrived in the room. He threw smoke pellets. He dropped from the ceiling and kicked a Skitarii in the head. It felt like kicking a fire hydrant. The soldier's head was metal under the hood. Batman realized these were not normal men. He used an EMP grenade. The electronic pulse went off. The Skitarii twitched and fell. But then they started to reboot. Their systems were hardened against electronic warfare. They were old tech, but tough. On the surface of DC Earth, the situation was getting worse. The Imperial Guard was deploying. They did not wait for air superiority. They launched drop pods and heavy landers. They landed in the parks and streets of Metropolis. The doors opened and thousands of soldiers ran out. They wore flak armor and carried laser rifles. They were the Astra Militarum. They had orders to secure the landing zone and dig trenches. The police of Metropolis tried to stop them. The police cars drove up with sirens blaring. The officers shouted through megaphones. The Imperial Commissar leading the regiment did not listen. He saw armed men in uniforms who did not wear the Imperial Aquila. He declared them rebels. The tanks rolled off the landers. They were lemon rust battle tanks. They were loud and smelled of diesel. The turrets turned. The first shell blew up a line of police cars. The war on the ground had started. Flash came running. He moved so fast he was invisible. He dismantled the rifles of the front-line soldiers. He tied their shoelaces together. He moved the tanks to face the wrong way. He stopped and looked at them. He tried to tell a joke to diffuse the tension. The soldiers looked at him with blank terror. Then they fixed bayonets. They charged at him with knives. Flash was confused. They were slow, but they had no fear. They were willing to run into a wood chipper if their officer ordered it. Flash realized he could not fight an army that did not care if it died. In orbit, the phalanx arrived. This was the mobile fortress of the Imperial Fist's Space Marines. It was the size of a small moon. It dwarfed the watchtower. It dwarfed everything. Chapter Master Gregor Dessian stood on the observation deck. He looked at the blue earth. He saw the heroes flying around. He saw the chaos. He did not see heroes. He saw unchecked psychers and mutants ruling over a lawless population. This was against the Imperial truth. He ordered the boarding torpedoes to be loaded. He selected his best Terminators. These were giant warriors in tactical dreadnought armor. They could walk through tank fire. He told them their mission was to secure the enemy command station. They were to purge the leaders. The boarding torpedoes were fired. They looked like giant Gothic churches with rockets on the back. They smashed into the watchtower. The hull breached. The air rushed out. The emergency force fields turned on. Martian Manhunter flew to the breach. He phased through the wall. He saw the Terminators stepping out of the wreckage. They were 8 feet tall. Their armor was yellow. They held storm bolters and power fists. They looked like walking tanks. Martian Manhunter tried to use his telepathy. He wanted to calm them down. He entered the mind of the sergeant. He screamed. The mind of the Space Marine was not like a human mind. It was a fortress of psycho-indoctrination. It was filled with burning hatred for the alien. It was filled with the memory of 1,000 wars. There was no room for negotiation. There was only duty. The psychic feedback hurt John. He fell to his knees. The Terminator saw him. The Marine raised his Stormbolter. He saw a green alien. The Codex Astartes was clear. Suffer not the alien to live. The bolter roared. Explosive diamond-tipped rounds filled the air. Superman was still on the bridge of the Cardinal Boras. He heard the screams of his friends over the comms. He saw the giant fortress ship outside. He realized he had made a mistake. He had treated this like a misunderstanding. He thought if he showed them he was nice they would stop. But these people did not want nice. They wanted order. They wanted submission. He looked at the Admiral. Superman asked one last time, He asked what they wanted. The Admiral smiled. Blood ran down his chin. He said they wanted his soul. He said they wanted to bring the light of the Emperor to this dark pit. Superman flew out of the bridge. He went back into space. He saw the scale of the fleet. More ships were arriving from the warp. The sky was filling with gold. There were millions of soldiers coming down. He saw the green lanterns failing to hold the line. He saw the cities of Earth burning. This was not a crime to be stopped. This was a meat grinder. The Imperium of Man had arrived. They brought their history with them. They brought the weight of 10,000 years of war. They did not care about logic or science or mercy. They only knew how to conquer. And this, Superman floated there for a second. For the first time in his life, he felt small. He was a god in his world. But here he was just one target in a war machine that spanned the galaxy. The first act of the war was over. The talking was done. Now the dying would begin. The two worlds were locked together in a death grip. Only one would survive. The timeline had split, and it was bleeding. The initial shock of the collision was over, but the strategic nightmare had just begun. The two planets were locked in a gravity well that was tearing both apart. On the surface of the DC Earth, the time for panic had passed. The time for the grind of war had arrived. The Imperium of Man does not invade with speed. It invades with weight. It is a slow and crushing force that does not know how to stop. The sky over Metropolis was no longer blue. It was choked with thousands of drop pods. They fell like iron rain. These were not the precision strikes the Justice League was used to. This was mass deployment. The Imperial Guard regiments were landing in the city centers. They did not care about property damage. They landed in parks and on highways. They landed in stadiums and schoolyards. The doors of the pods blew open with explosive bolts. Out of the smoke marched the soldiers of the Astra Militarum. These were Cadian shock troops. They wore heavy flak armor and helmets that covered their eyes in shadow. They carried laser guns that were connected to power packs on their belts. They did not run. They did not shout. They marched in perfect lines. Behind them came the heavy equipment. Chimera transport tanks crushed the cars on the street. Their tracks ground the asphalt into dust. Officers with high-peaked caps shouted orders through voxcasters. They were establishing a firing line. Superman hovered above the Daily Planet building. He looked down at the invasion. His mind raced. He could fly down and destroy a tank. He could melt 1,000 guns with his heat vision. But there were millions of them. If he stopped one regiment, another would land behind it. And these were not monsters. They were men. He could hear their heartbeats. They were afraid. They were praying to their emperor. Superman was paralyzed by his own morality. He could not just slaughter an army of drafted humans. He flew down to the front line. He landed in front of a Lehman Russ battle tank. The tank commander saw the red cape. He did not see a hero. He saw an unsanctioned psyker. The commander shouted the order to fire. The main battle cannon roared. The shell hit Superman in the chest. It exploded with enough force to level a city block. The smoke cleared. Superman was still standing. His suit was scorched, but he was unhurt. He looked at the tank commander with sad eyes. Superman moved forward. He ripped the barrel off the tank. He tossed it aside. He told the soldiers to go home. He said they did not have to fight. The soldiers looked at each other. For a second they hesitated. Then the commissar stepped forward. He wore a long black coat and a skull mask. He held a bolt pistol. He did not aim at Superman. He aimed at his own soldiers. He shouted that cowardice was punishable by death. He fired. A soldier fell dead. The commissar screamed that the emperor protects the brave. The soldiers raised their guns. They were more afraid of the commissar than they were of the invulnerable man. They opened fire on Superman. The Man of Steel realized he was fighting a psychology he could not break. In the orbit above the situation was becoming a disaster. The Justice League watchtower was a wreck. The boarding torpedoes had done their job. The station was venting atmosphere. Inside the station, Batman was fighting a war in the shadows. He had engaged the stealth protocols. The lights were out. He moved through the ventilation shafts. Below him, the hallways were filled with Imperial Navy breachers and Skitarii Rangers. They were sweeping the station room by room. They were looking for the machine spirit of the station. Batman dropped down on a squad of breachers. He used his stun batons. He moved with the grace of a master martial artist. He broke bones and shattered visors. He took down 6 men in 4 seconds. But then the heavy footsteps approached. A Terminator from the Imperial Fists arrived. The giant yellow warrior filled the corridor. The tactical dreadnought armor hummed with power. The Marine held a thunderhammer. Batman threw explosive batarangs. They hit the Terminator's helmet. The explosions did nothing but scratch the paint. The Terminator swung the hammer. It hit the wall. The metal of the station buckled. The shockwave knocked Batman backward. He realized his gadgets were useless against this level of armor. He needed a plan. He needed to vent the section. He accessed the station controls on his gauntlet. But the controls did not respond. A voice spoke in his ear. It was not Alfred. It was a harsh metallic screech. It was the scrap code of the Mechanicus. On the other side of the station, Cyborg was screaming. He had plugged into the central computer to fight the hackers. He expected to find a firewall. He expected binary code. He did not find that. He found the machine spirit. The Imperial cogitators were not just machines. They were semi-sentient ghosts born from thousands of years of ritual and worship. They were angry. They were confused. Cyborg's mind was flooded with data that made no sense. He saw blueprints for Titans. He heard prayers in High Gothic. He felt the pain of the servitors who were wired into the enemy ships. The logic virus of the Mechanicus attacked his biological side. It tried to rewrite his DNA. It tried to tell him that his flesh was weak. It tried to make him purge his own humanity. Cyborg fell to the floor. His red eye flickered. His armor began to change shape. Cogs and pistons burst from his skin. He was being forcibly converted into a servant of the Omnissiah. The watchtower went dark. The Justice League had lost their eyes in the sky. On the ground in Gotham City, the war was different. The shadows of Gotham attracted a different kind of predator. The Night Lords had arrived. They were traitor Marines who had long ago turned to chaos, but the Imperium brought its own monsters too. The Inquisition had deployed the Officio Assassinorum. They knew that Gotham was a place of fear. They sent the Eversaw assassins. These were drug-fueled killing machines that did not stop until their hearts exploded. Commissioner Gordon stood on the roof of the GCPD. He turned on the bat signal. The light cut through the smoke. But Batman did not come. Instead, a drop pod slammed into the roof. It crushed the signal. The doors blew open. A skull-faced assassin leapt out. It moved faster than the eye could follow. It had claws dripping with neurotoxins. It slaughtered the police officers on the roof in seconds. It was not a fight. It was a butchery. Gordon fell back against the door. He fired his pistol. The assassin dodged the bullets like they were standing still. Then a green light smashed into the assassin. Green Lantern. Hal Jordan had returned from orbit. He created a construct of a giant hammer and smashed the assassin into the brickwork. The assassin screamed and injected itself with combat drugs. It stood up with broken bones. It charged again. Hal trapped it in a bubble. The assassin clawed at the green energy until its fingers broke. It did not stop. It detonated the melter bomb in its chest. The explosion shattered the roof. Hal shielded Gordon, but the police station was gone. Hal looked at the burning ruins. He realized these enemies were essentially suicide bombers who were also super soldiers. The magic of the DC universe began to react to the presence of the warp. Dr. Fate sat in the Tower of Fate. He felt the fabric of reality thinning. The arrival of the Warhammer Earth had brought the Sea of Souls with it. The warp is the dimension of pure emotion and chaos. It was leaking into the DC reality. In the middle of Central City, a rift opened. It was a tear in the air that bled purple light. From the rift came the Neverborn. Demons. They were not the demons the Justice League knew. They were not like Trigon or Etrigan. They were formless horrors made of teeth and fire. They were bloodletters of Khorne. They carried brass swords and screamed for skulls. They spilled into the streets. They started killing civilians just to harvest the blood. The Flash ran to the scene. He saw the monsters. He vibrated his molecules to phase through a diamond. Usually this would explode the enemy, but the demon was not made of matter. It was made of warp energy. Flash got stuck. He felt the cold corruption of the warp touching his soul. He vibrated harder. He shattered the demon, but the psychic feedback knocked him out. He lay on the asphalt. The other demons gathered around him. They raised their swords. Suddenly, a bolt of blue lightning struck the ground. A librarian of the Ultramarines teleported in. He was a Space Marine psyker. He wore a blue hood and carried a force staff. He saw the demons. He did not see the Flash as a friend. He saw a mutant lying on the ground, but the demons were the greater threat. The librarian slammed his staff down. He spoke a word of power that hurt the ears of everyone within a mile. A shockwave of psychic denial banished the demons back to the warp. The librarian looked down at the Flash. He raised his bolt pistol. The Flash was a mutant who moved too fast. This was unnatural. The Codex Astartes said the mutant must be purged. The librarian prepared to execute the fastest man alive. But then Wonder Woman dropped from the sky. She blocked the bolt with her bracelet. She kicked the librarian back. Wonder Woman stood over the Flash. She held her sword and shield. She shouted at the Space Marine. She asked why he would kill a man who just fought the monsters. The librarian stood up. He looked at Diana. He saw a woman who radiated power. He saw her lasso that glowed with truth. To him, this was sorcery. She was a witch. The witch does not question the Emperor's angel, the librarian said. His voice was like grinding stones. He charged his staff with lightning. Wonder Woman braced herself. She realized there was no reasoning with these people. Their dogma was absolute. To them, being different was a capital crime. Back in orbit, the strategic situation shifted again. The Mechanicus had analyzed the Justice League. They realized that the heroes were the center of gravity. If the heroes fell, the planet would surrender. The Fabricator General gave a logical command. They would deploy the Titans. The massive transport ships entered the atmosphere. They were the size of cities. They lowered toward the ground. The heat of their re-entry burned the clouds away. They landed in the deserts of Nevada and the plains of Kansas. The doors opened. The God Machines walked. The Warlord Titans stood 100 feet tall. They were walking cathedrals of destruction. They had void shields that could stop nuclear weapons. Their arms were volcano cannons and Gatling blasters. They sounded war horns that shattered windows 50 miles away. The ground shook with every step. They began to march toward the cities. Superman heard the horns. He was still in Metropolis trying to save people from the crossfire. He looked west. He saw the dust cloud rising. He saw the giants. He knew that if they reached the cities, there would be nothing left. He had to stop them. He flew toward Kansas at Mach 10. He reached the leading Titan. It was named Deus Irae. It was ancient and covered in banners of previous wars. Superman flew at its head. He intended to knock it over. He hit the void shields. It was like hitting a wall of solid time. The impact stopped him dead. The kinetic energy was absorbed by the shields and vented as waste heat. The air around the Titan turned into plasma. Superman was thrown back. The princeps inside the Titan saw the thermal bloom. He linked his mind to the machine. He felt the Titan's hunger for war. He turned the Apocalypse missile launchers toward the tiny blue dot. He fired. A swarm of missiles the size of telephone poles streaked toward Superman. Superman used his heat vision to detonate them. The sky filled with fire, but the Titan kept walking. It fired its plasma destructor. A sun-hot ball of energy hit the ground. It vaporized a small town. The crater was a mile wide. Superman screamed. He flew through the fire. He pushed himself harder than he ever had. He flew into the void shields again. He punched with the force of a collapsing star. The shield flared and failed. He smashed into the metal face of the Titan. He ripped the cockpit open. He saw the crew. They were wired into the chairs. They were chanting. Superman realized he couldn't just disable the machine. The machine was the crew, and the crew was the machine. He tore the reactor core out. The Titan toppled. It fell with an earth-shattering crash. But there were 12 more Titans behind it, and they were all firing. In the White House, the President of the United States was screaming at his generals. He wanted to know why the nukes hadn't been fired. The generals were pale. They explained that the Imperial ships in orbit had intercepted the launch codes. The Imperium had complete control of the digital sphere. The mundane armies of Earth were blind and deaf. The tanks couldn't communicate. The planes couldn't navigate. The satellites were being shot down or eaten by scrap code. The only resistance left was the heroes, and the heroes were being separated and hunted. Aquaman was in the Atlantic Ocean. He had called the seven seas to war. The armies of Atlantis rose from the depths. They rode giant sharks and piloted high-tech submarines. They met the Imperial Navy in the water. The Imperium had dropped amphibious assault craft, but the real threat was the pollution. The Imperium had begun to dump toxic waste from their ships directly into the ocean. It was a holy rite of cleansing for them. They were purifying their ships by dumping the filth onto the enemy. The water turned black. The fish died by the millions. Aquaman felt their death psychically. It drove him into a rage. He summoned a kraken. The giant beast wrapped its tentacles around an Imperial cruiser that had landed in the water. It dragged the ship down. The hull groaned and snapped, but the ship's reactor went critical. The explosion boiled the sea for miles. The kraken died. Aquaman was thrown onto the shore of Amnesty Bay. He was bleeding. The water he loved was now a graveyard. Night fell over the war-torn world, but it was not dark. The sky was lit by the fires of burning cities and the lance strikes from orbit. The Imperium had established a foothold. They had secured the landing zones. They had built fortifications in hours that would normally take months. They used prefabricated ferrocrete bunkers. They dug trenches deep into the bedrock. On the Phalanx chapter, Master Gregor Decian reviewed the data. The resistance was stiffer than expected. The metahumans were powerful. The Kryptonian was an Alpha Plus level threat. The Speedster was a variable they could not calculate. The magic users were dangerous, uncontrolled psychers. The standard doctrine of overwhelming force was working, but it was slow. The casualty rates for the Imperial Guard were 40%. This was acceptable to the High Command, but Decian knew they needed to break the enemy's spirit. He contacted the Inquisitor Lord who had accompanied the fleet. The Inquisitor was named Malik. He sat in a darkened room on the flagship. He was reading the mind of a captured superhero. It was Plastic Man. The hero had been frozen in liquid nitrogen and shattered, but his pieces were still alive. The Inquisitor was psychically torturing the pieces to learn the weaknesses of the League. Malik spoke to Decian. He told him that the heroes suffered from a weakness of compassion. They cared about the civilians. They would sacrifice tactical advantage to save lives. This was their flaw. The Imperium would exploit it. The order was given to the fleet. They would stop targeting military assets. They would target population centers. They would create killing zones. They would herd the civilians into specific areas and then threaten to bombard them unless the heroes surrendered. It was a hostage situation on a planetary scale. Batman, back in the Batcave, saw the pattern emerging on his backup computer. He saw the troop movements changing. They were surrounding the hospitals and the shelters. They were not attacking. They were waiting. Batman realized the game had changed. They weren't fighting a war anymore. They were being exterminated. He looked at the suit he had been building. It was the Hellbat armor. It was designed to fight gods. He knew it would kill him if he wore it too long. But he had no choice. The Justice League was scattered. Superman was fighting Titans in Kansas. Wonder Woman was dueling Space Marines in Central City. Flash was down. Green Lantern was holding the line in orbit. Batman put on the helmet. The red eyes glowed. He would take the fight to them. He would board the phalanx. He would find the leaders and he would end this. But deep down, the world's greatest detective knew the odds. He had analyzed the Imperial data streams. He saw the date on their calendar. It was the 41st millennium. These people had been fighting a losing war for 10,000 years. They had forgotten how to surrender. You cannot intimidate a culture that worships martyrdom. The catastrophe was not that the Earth was losing. The catastrophe was that to win, the Earth would have to become just as ruthless as the Imperium. The moral high ground was being vaporized by macro cannons. It ended with the silence of a dead city. Coast City had been chosen as an example. A single cyclonic torpedo had been fired. It buried itself in the earth and detonated. The atmosphere burned. The city was gone. 7 million people died in a second. The message was broadcast on all frequencies. Submission is the only path to salvation. Superman floated over the crater that used to be Coast City. He fell to his knees in the air. He wept. And in the silence of space, the Chaos Gods began to laugh. They saw the despair of the heroes, and they saw a new playground opening up. The warp storm expanded. The barrier between realities shattered completely. Now it wasn't just an invasion. It was a merger. The nightmare had truly arrived. The destruction of Coast City changed the war. It was no longer a battle for territory. It was a battle for survival. The dust from the dead city rose into the atmosphere. It blocked the sun over North America. The temperature dropped. The crops began to die. The strategic situation shifted from a military invasion to a planetary siege. Superman flew through the ash clouds. His eyes were red. He had cried for the millions of dead people. Now he was done crying. He was angry, but he was also smart. He knew he could not just punch the planet of terror. That would kill the slaves and the innocent people living there. He had to cut off the head of the snake. He had to stop the leadership. He changed his tactics. He stopped trying to talk. He flew into orbit at full speed. He targeted the escort ships of the Imperial fleet. These were the frigates and destroyers. They were smaller than the battleships, but they protected them. Superman became a blur of red and blue motion. He flew through the void shields. The shields burned his skin, but he did not stop. He smashed into the engines of a Sword-class frigate. He ripped the plasma drive out. The ship lost power. It began to drift. He did this 12 times in 1 hour. He disabled a whole squadron. The Imperial formation broke. The massive battleships were exposed. This was a tactical victory, but the Imperium does not care about losses. They only care about punishment. Chapter Master Gregor. Decian saw the ships dying. He did not feel fear. He felt cold anger. He saw that the alien leader was targeting the weak spots. Decian ordered the fleet to change formation. They moved into a defensive sphere. They put the civilian transport ships on the outside. These ships were full of slaves and pilgrims from Terra. They used their own people as a shield. If Superman attacked the warships, he would have to fly through the ships of the innocent. Superman stopped. He floated in space. He saw the wall of ragged ships. He heard the prayers of the people inside. They were singing hymns to the God Emperor. They were happy to be shields. They believed that dying for the fleet was a holy duty. Superman could not break through. His morality was his weakness. The Imperium weaponized his kindness. While the battle in space turned into a stalemate, the war on the ground became a nightmare of logistics. The Imperium needed resources. They needed metal for bullets and fuel for tanks. They did not bring enough supplies for a long war. They decided to take what they needed from Earth. Lex Luthor sat in his office in Metropolis. The city was half ruined, but the LexCorp tower was standing. It was protected by private energy shields. Luthor drank a glass of expensive scotch. He watched the news. He saw the Justice League failing. He saw the government collapsing. He smiled. He did not see an apocalypse. He saw an opportunity. He sent a signal on a frequency used by the Adeptus Mechanicus. It was a mathematical code. It was a proof of concept for a new energy battery. It was bait. A dropship landed on the roof of LexCorp. It was a rusted iron shuttle. The door opened. Magos Vorka stepped out. He was more machine than man. He had 4 mechanical arms on his back. His face was a metal skull. He wore red robes that dragged on the floor. He was followed by Skitarii guards. Luthor stood up. He did not bow. He offered a handshake. The Magos looked at the hand with disgust. He did not touch flesh. Luthor spoke. He told the Magos that he understood them. He said he knew they sought knowledge. He showed them the designs for his warsuits. He showed them the data on the Kryptonian DNA. He showed them a mother box he had hidden in his vault. The Magos made a clicking sound. His optical lenses spun. He saw technology that defied the laws of the Imperium. This was tech heresy. It was forbidden innovation. But the Magos was greedy. The Mechanicus seeks the standard template constructs of the past. Luthor's tech looked like the lost magic of the dark age of technology. The Magos made a calculation. If he destroyed Luthor, he would lose the data. If he worked with Luthor, he could steal the secrets. The Magos agreed to a temporary alliance. Luthor gave them access to his factories. In exchange, the Mechanicus gave Luthor access to their weapons. This was the strategic chain reaction. The industrial power of LexCorp combined with the brutal science of Mars. Within days, the factories of Metropolis were running again. But they were not making cars or phones. They were making servitors. The Imperial forces began to round up the civilians. They did not put them in prisons. They brought them to the LexCorp factories. The people were processed. The sick and the old were turned into food paste called corpse starch. The strong were mind-wiped. They had their brains lobotomized. They had mechanical tools drilled into their arms. They became living machines. Luthor watched the production line. He saw a former bank manager being turned into a heavy loader. He felt a moment of disgust, but he pushed it down. He told himself this was necessary. He told himself he would use this army to save the world, and then he would rule it. He did not realize that chaos always corrupts the ambitious. In the shadows of Gotham City, another corruption was growing. The Joker had survived the bombing. He was hiding in the sewers. He was laughing. He found the war funny. The destruction was the ultimate joke. But then he found something else. He found a book. It had fallen from a destroyed word-bearer's ship that had been hiding in the fleet. The book was bound in human skin. The pages were hot to the touch. The Joker opened it. He read the words. They were not English. They were the language of the warp. The words moved on the page. They whispered to him. The Joker listened. He heard the voice of Zanch, the changer of ways. He heard the giggles of Nurgle the Plague Father. The Chaos Gods looked at the Joker and saw a masterpiece. His mind was already broken. It was a perfect doorway. The Joker stopped laughing. He started to change. His skin turned purple and green. His smile grew wider until it split his face. He gained the power to warp reality with his jokes. He walked out of the sewer. He saw a squad of Imperial Guardsmen. He told them a joke. The joke was so funny that their lungs filled with fluid and they drowned on dry land. Their bodies mutated into colorful horrors. The Joker danced down the street. Behind him, the reality of Gotham started to melt. The buildings turned into candy and rotting meat. The sky turned into a giant smiling mouth. Chaos had a foothold on Earth. It was not an invasion of soldiers. It was an invasion of madness. Batman was in the Batcave. He saw the sensors reading the reality shift in Gotham. He knew he was running out of time. He looked at the Hellbat armor. It hung in the display case. It was black and red. It pulsed with a dangerous energy. It was forged in the sun by Superman and built by the gods. It was the only thing that could survive the high-level combat. Batman put on the suit. The needles connected to his nervous system. He felt the pain. The suit fed on his metabolism. It would kill him if he used it for more than a few hours. But Batman was prepared to die. He launched the Batwing. He did not fly to Gotham. He flew up. He engaged the stealth drive. He flew past the blockade. He flew toward the phalanx. He had to kill the commander. He had to cut the head off the snake. The Batwing crashed through the hangar bay of the massive fortress. Batman ejected. He landed on the deck. The Hellbat armor made him strong. He punched a Space Marine. The Marine flew across the room and smashed into a wall. His armor cracked. Batman fired his chest beam. It cut through a tank. The alarm sounded. Intruder. Extremist level. Batman ran through the halls of the phalanx. He knew the layout because he had hacked their cogitators. He ran toward the command bridge. He fought his way through hundreds of serfs and soldiers. He moved like a demon. He was a creature of shadow and fear. But then he met the elite guard. The Huskarls of the Imperial Fists. They were Terminators carrying storm shields and thunder hammers. They blocked the hallway. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a wall of yellow ceramite. Batman charged. He used the flight capability of the suit. He flew over their heads. He dropped explosive pellets. The Terminators turned with surprising speed. One of them swung a hammer. It hit Batman in the ribs. The Hellbat armor held, but Batman coughed blood inside the helmet. The force was like being hit by a train. He landed and deployed his cape. The cape hardened into a blade. He slashed the leg joints of the Terminator. The giant fell. Batman pressed forward. He was losing blood. The suit was eating him. His vision was blurring. He reached the blast doors of the bridge. He placed a shaped charge. The door blew open. He stepped onto the bridge. Chapter Master Gregor Decian was waiting for him. Decian did not have a helmet on. He held a giant power sword. He looked at Batman with respect. You fight well for a mortal, Decian said. But you fight for chaos. You fight for disorder. Batman did not speak. He activated the energy drain on his gloves. He charged. While Batman fought in the sky, Wonder Woman fought for her home. The island of Themyscira was hidden by magic, but the psychics of the Imperium had found it. The Sisters of Battle had arrived. The Order of the Bloody Rose dropped from the sky. They were warrior nuns in power armor. They believed the Amazons were witches. They believed the island was a nest of heresy. They landed on the beaches of paradise. They carried flamers and bolters. They sang hymns as they burned the ancient forests. Queen Hippolyta led the charge. The Amazons rode their horses. They fired arrows that could pierce tank armor. They clashed with the sisters on the white sand. It was sword against chainsword, magic against faith. Wonder Woman flew down from the clouds. She slammed into an Exorcist missile tank. She flipped it over. She saw the canoness of the Order. The canoness was named Viridian. She wore a cloak of silk and carried a sword that burned with holy fire. Wonder Woman shouted for them to stop. She said this was a holy place. Canoness Viridian laughed. She said, "There is no holy place but terror." She said the Emperor is the only God. She pointed her sword at Diana. "Die, witch," Viridian yelled. She did not just attack with a sword. She attacked with faith. The Sisters of Battle have a power called acts of faith. Their belief is so strong it changes reality. Viridian prayed. A golden light surrounded her. Wonder Woman threw her lasso. The lasso passed right through the canoness. The faith of the sister protected her from the magic. Diana was shocked. She had fought gods and monsters. She had never fought a human whose will was a weapon. Viridian struck. Her sword cut Diana's arm. It was the first time Diana had been hurt by a human weapon in centuries. The blade was blessed. The battle for Themyscira was brutal. The Amazons were dying. Their immortality did not stop bolter rounds. The sisters were dying too. Their armor was cut by magical swords. The blue water turned red. Wonder Woman realized that this enemy could not be reasoned with. They could not be scared. They wanted to die. They believed death was a reward. How do you defeat an enemy who wants to be a martyr? Back in the United States, the Flash was trying to save the Midwest. The Titans were still walking. The Imperial Guard had dug trenches from Chicago to St. Louis. The Flash ran supplies to the Resistance. He ran food to the starving towns. But the Flash was getting tired. The Speed Force was connected to the universe, and the universe was hurting. The warp rift in Gotham was poisoning the physics of the world. Flash felt the friction increasing. The air felt thick. He ran into a trap. The Mechanicus had learned. They had deployed a weapon called a transuranic arquebus. It was a sniper rifle that fired a bullet made of depleted radioactive metal. It was aimed by a computer that could calculate microseconds. The Flash ran down a highway in Iowa. He was carrying medicine. The Skitarii sniper lay on a hill 3 miles away. He did not aim where the Flash was. He aimed where the Flash would be. He pulled the trigger. The bullet moved at hypersonic speed. It hit the Flash in the leg. The impact shattered his kneecap. Flash tumbled. He rolled for a mile. The asphalt tore his suit. He lay in the ditch. He tried to heal, but the bullet was radioactive. It poisoned his cells. It stopped his regeneration. The Skitarii Rangers emerged from the cornfields. They walked slowly. They emitted their static war cry. Flash tried to stand. He fell. He looked at his leg. It was black and blue. He vibrated his hand to generate a sonic boom. He knocked the first wave back. But there were too many. They surrounded him. They threw an electro-net over him. The net shocked his nervous system. The fastest man alive was caught. They dragged him to a transport. They did not kill him. The Magos wanted to study him. They wanted to know how a biological unit could move that fast. They put him in a stasis pod. They shipped him to the LexCorp factory. Flash was gone from the board. The loss of the Flash was felt immediately. The supply lines for the humans collapsed. Starvation set in within days. The people began to riot, but the riots were short. The Imperial enforcers used heavy stubbers to clear the streets. Order was restored through mass execution. In the Hall of Justice, the remaining heroes gathered. Aquaman was wounded. Cyborg was fighting a virus in his own brain. Green Lantern was exhausted. Martian Manhunter was in a coma from the psychic backlash. Superman returned from orbit. He floated into the room. He looked different. His suit was torn. His cape was burned. But his face was hard. He looked at the tactical map. He saw the red zones covering the world. He saw the loss of Themyscira. He saw the capture of Flash. He saw Gotham turning into a demon world. "We are losing," Aquaman said. "We need to escalate. We need to kill them." Superman looked at his hands. "If we kill them, we become them. That is what they want. They want to drag us down into the mud." "We are already in the mud," Cyborg said. His voice sounded like two voices. One human, one machine. "I can feel their network. They are building a weapon. Something big. On the moon." Superman looked at the moon. He used his telescopic vision. He saw the construction. The Mechanicus was building a Nova cannon. It was a gun the size of a city. It was pointed at the Earth. It was an ultimatum. Surrender, or the planet cracks. "Batman is on the Phalanx," Superman said. "He is our only chance to stop the Fleet Command. If he fails, the cannon fires." On the Phalanx, Batman was on his knees. The Hellbat suit was failing. The energy levels were at zero. Gregor Dessian stood over him. The Space Marine was wounded. Batman had broken his arm. But a broken arm does not stop an Astartes. Dessian raised his sword. "You have spirit," the chapter master said. "In another life, you would have made a fine Inquisitor. But you are on the wrong side of history. The Emperor protects." Batman looked up. He didn't see a monster. He saw a soldier who believed he was right. That was the tragedy. Batman reached for his belt. He had one last trick. It wasn't a weapon. It was a teleporter beacon. "He does protect," Batman whispered. "But not from this." Batman pressed the button. He didn't teleport himself away. He teleported the Justice League Watchtower's reactor core. He had set it to overload before he left. The core materialized in the middle of the bridge. It was a small sun. The explosion was contained by the void shields of the bridge for a microsecond. Then the bridge of the Phalanx vaporized. The explosion blew a hole in the side of the massive fortress. Batman was gone. Gregor Dessian was gone. The command center of the Imperial fleet was dust. The Phalanx drifted. The fleet was blind. On Earth, the heroes saw the flash in the sky. Superman closed his eyes. He heard the heartbeat of Bruce Wayne stop. The silence was deafening. The strategic head of the invasion was gone, but the body was still alive. And now, the body was uncontrolled. The Imperial captains were independent. The connection to the High Lords was severed. They would not surrender. They would panic. And in the warp, the Chaos Gods cheered. The death of a hero like Batman released a massive amount of psychic energy. The rift in Gotham tore open wider. The sky turned purple. From the rift, a new ship emerged. It was not gold. It was covered in flesh and spikes. It belonged to the Black Legion. Abaddon the Despoiler had seen the light of the conflict. The Imperium had weakened the reality. Now chaos would finish it. The collision of worlds had created a wound in the universe, and the sharks had smelled the blood. It ended not with a victory, but with a descent into madness. The war was no longer Imperium versus Justice League. It was a three-way war for the soul of the planet. and the planet was screaming. The death of Batman and Chapter Master Gregor Dessian created a vacuum in the center of the war. For a moment, there was silence in the orbit. The massive, burning wreck of the Phalanx drifted away from the Earth. It looked like a dead moon. The explosion had been so bright that it blinded the sensors of both fleets. But the silence did not last. The Imperial fleet was leaderless, but it was not beaten. The captains of the hundreds of ships began to panic. They had lost their commander. They had lost their connection to the High Lords. In the grim darkness of the far future, panic does not lead to surrender. It leads to fanaticism. The captains believed that the Emperor was testing them. They believed they had failed in their duty. They decided that if they could not conquer the Earth, they would burn it. The bombardment began again. It was not coordinated. It was wild. Ships fired at random cities. They fired at the oceans. They fired at the clouds. The logic of war was gone. It was just a spasm of violence. On the ground, the situation was changing fast. The rift in Gotham City had grown. The death of a hero like Batman released a psychic shockwave. The warp feeds on emotion. The grief of the world fed the rift. The purple tear in the sky opened wide. From the rift came the vengeful spirit. This was the flagship of the Black Legion. It was older than the Imperium. It was a demon ship. It was covered in gargoyles and spikes. It bled oil and smoke into the atmosphere. Standing on the bridge was Abaddon the Despoiler. He was the War Master of Chaos. He had led 13 crusades to destroy the Imperium. He saw the chaos below and he smiled. He did not come to save the Earth. He came to claim it for the Dark Gods. The Black Legion drop pods landed in Gotham. They were not like the Loyalist pods. They were covered in screaming faces. When they landed, they did not just open. They bit the ground. Out stepped the traitor Marines. They wore black armor with gold trim. They did not march in silence. They howled. They carried bolters that fired explosive rounds possessed by tiny demons. The Joker was waiting for them. He stood on a pile of rubble. He had changed. He was no longer just a man. He was a demon prince of chaos undivided. He was 10 feet tall. His suit was made of flayed skin. His laugh broke glass for miles around. He bowed to Abaddon. The alliance between the clown prince of crime and the war master of chaos was sealed. Superman was in the fortress of solitude. He was watching the screens. He saw the new ships. He saw the monsters pouring out of Gotham. He saw the Imperial fleet firing blindly. He felt a pain he had never known. Bruce was gone. The man who always had a plan was dead. Superman was alone. Wonder Woman contacted him. Her voice was weak. She was still on Themyscira. The Sisters of Battle were dead, but the island was ruined. She told Superman that this new enemy was worse. She said she could feel the evil of the Black Legion. It was ancient and hungry. She said the Justice League was too small. They could not fight a war on 3 fronts. They could not fight the Imperium, the mechanics, and now chaos. Superman looked at the wall of the fortress. There was a mirror there. It was the projector for the Phantom Zone. It was a prison dimension. Inside it were the worst criminals of Krypton. General Zod was there. Ursa was there. Non was there. They were soldiers. They were conquerors. They had the same powers as Superman. Superman knew that releasing them was madness. Zod wanted to rule. Zod hated humanity. But Zod also cared about Krypton. He cared about his people. Superman thought he could use that. He thought he could make a deal. It was a small choice. It was a choice born of desperation. He thought he could control the outcome. He floated to the console. His hand hovered over the button. He remembered what Batman would say. Batman would say it was too dangerous. But Batman was dead, and the world was burning. Superman pressed the button. The mirror shattered. A beam of white light hit the floor of the fortress. 3 figures appeared. They were dressed in black Kryptonian armor. They looked around. They took a breath of the air. They felt the yellow sun. Their eyes began to glow red. General Zod looked at Superman. He smiled. It was a cold smile. He asked why he was free. Superman explained the war. He explained the invaders. He told Zod that this other Earth was a threat to everything. He told Zod that if they did not fight, there would be nothing left to rule. Zod listened. He looked at the screens. He saw the Imperial ships. He saw the crude human technology of the Imperium. He laughed. He called them savages. He agreed to the deal. He said he would kill the invaders. He said he would save the planet. But he did not say he would save the humans. Superman missed that detail. He was too relieved to have help. The Kryptonians flew out of the fortress. They broke the sound barrier. They flew toward Metropolis. The city was under attack by the Black Legion. The traitor Marines were slaughtering the Imperial Guard and the civilians alike. They were building a tower of skulls in the park. Zod arrived first. He did not slow down. He flew through a Chaos Dreadnought. The giant walker exploded. Zod stopped in the air. He used his heat vision. He swept it across the street. He cut 10 Chaos Space Marines in half. Their armor was ancient and blessed by dark gods, but it could not stop the heat of a star. Ursa and Non joined him. Non landed on a tank and crushed it flat. Ursa flew through the buildings, throwing cars at the flying demons. For a moment it looked like a victory. The Black Legion was being pushed back. The Kryptonians were unstoppable. They were gods of war. Superman joined the fight. He felt a surge of hope. He thought he had made the right choice. He thought he could manage Zod. He fought side by side with his enemy. They punched demons back into the warp. They saved a school bus full of children. Zod looked at the children. He did not look at them with pity. He looked at them like a farmer looks at cattle. But the Chaos Gods were watching. High in the warp corn, the Blood God looked down. He saw Zod. He saw the rage in Zod's heart. He saw the pride. He saw the martial skill. Khorne does not care where the blood flows from. He only cares that it flows. He saw a potential champion. On the ground, Abaddon saw the Kryptonians. He was not afraid. He was a veteran of 10,000 years of war. He knew that every soul has a crack. He knew that pride was the biggest crack of all. He ordered his sorcerers to stop attacking and start chanting. The sorcerers of the Black Legion began a ritual. They did not cast a spell to hurt Zod. They cast a spell to talk to him. They projected a voice into Zod's head. It was a voice of iron and fire. It told Zod that he was wasting his time. It told him that Superman was weak. It told him that the humans were weak. It told him that true power comes from conquest. Zod stopped fighting. He floated above the burning city. He felt the red rain falling on his face. The rain was blood. It was a manifestation of the warp. The voice promised him a galaxy. It promised him that he could rebuild Krypton, not just a city, but an empire. All he had to do was kill the weakling. All he had to do was accept the truth of blood. Superman flew up to Zod. He asked Zod why he had stopped. He pointed at the retreating demons. He said they needed to finish them. Zod looked at Superman. Zod's eyes were not just glowing red from heat vision. They were glowing with a different light, the light of hate. Zod spoke. He said that Superman had spent his life protecting ants. He said that Krypton was a race of warriors. He said that this new universe, this war-torn galaxy, made more sense to him than the peace of Earth. "I see the truth now, Kal-El," Zod said. "Peace is a lie." Zod punched Superman. The blow was harder than anything Superman had ever felt. It cracked the air. Superman flew backward and smashed into the Daily Planet building. The building collapsed. Zod screamed at the sky. He offered his soul to the blood god. He accepted the gift. The change was instant. Zod's black armor began to warp. Brass symbols grew out of the metal. The symbol of Khorne burned into his chest. Spikes erupted from his shoulders. His cape turned the color of fresh arterial blood. He grew larger. His skin turned grey like stone. He was no longer just a Kryptonian. He was a demon prince of Khorne. Ursa and Non changed too. Ursa fell to Slaanesh, the prince of pleasure. She wanted the perfection of pain. Her movements became a blur of deadly grace. Non fell to Nurgle. He became a bloating mountain of disease and strength. Superman climbed out of the rubble. He was bleeding. He looked up and saw his mistake. He had not saved the world. He had given the Chaos Gods the ultimate weapon. He had given them Supermen. The war shifted again. It was now a three-way slaughter. The Black Legion and the Chaos Kryptonians were on one side. The broken Imperium was on another. And the Justice League was in the middle. General Zod flew down. He did not use heat vision. He summoned an axe made of red energy. He swung it at the city. The shockwave leveled 10 blocks. He screamed, "Blood for the blood god." The sound shattered windows in the next state. Superman flew at him. They collided in the sky. The impact was like a nuclear bomb. They fought across the continent. They punched each other through mountains. But Zod was stronger now. He had the strength of Krypton and the magic of the warp. Every time he hit Superman, the magic burned Superman's skin. Superman was losing. Meanwhile, in the Pacific Ocean, another disaster was unfolding. The Mechanicus had not been idle. Lex Luthor and Margus Volkas had been working on their project. They had ignored the chaos in the cities. They believed that science would win. Luthor had given the Mechanicus access to the Atlantean technology he had stolen. The Magos combined this with Necron technology he had excavated from the collision site. They built a device called the Null Matrix. It was designed to shut down the psychic connection of the warp. It was designed to close the rift in Gotham. Luthor activated the machine. A pulse of green energy shot out from the LexCorp tower. It swept across the globe. It did not close the rift. The technology of the two universes was not compatible. The Necron tech reacted with the mother box energy Luthor used as a power source. Instead of closing the warp, it sent out a signal. It was a beacon. It was a dinner bell. Deep in the dark space between galaxies, the Tyranid hive mind heard the signal. The Tyranids are the great devourer. They are a swarm of biological monsters that eat all life. They had been sleeping in the void of the 40K universe. But the signal woke them up, and it told them exactly where the biomass was. A shadow fell over the solar system. It was not a ship. It was a cloud of spores and ships made of meat and bone. The Tyranids had arrived. The first spores hit the atmosphere. They landed in the Amazon rainforest. They began to eat the trees. They grew rapidly. Gaunts and Genestealers hatched from the pods. They ran into the villages. They ate the people. They did not hate. They just ate. Aquaman felt it first. He felt the life of the ocean vanishing. He felt a silence spreading in the water. It was the silence of extinction. He tried to command the fish to fight, but the fish were panicked. They were being consumed by ripper swarms. On the moon, the Mechanicus saw the shadow. They realized their mistake. They had invited the ultimate predator. Magos Volkas calculated the odds of survival. They were 0.00%. But the Mechanicus does not give up. They prepared their defenses. Back in Metropolis, the fight between Superman and Demon Zod was destroying the tectonic plates. Superman realized he could not win with brute force. He was fighting a magical monster. He needed help. He flew toward the Tower of Fate. Dr. Fate was the only one who understood magic. But the tower was surrounded by the Thousand Suns. These were Chaos Marines who served Sainch. They were sorcerers. They were trying to break into the tower to steal the Helmet of Fate. Shazam arrived to help. The young boy Billy Batson shouted the magic word. Lightning struck. He transformed. He flew into the Thousand Suns. His magic lightning disrupted their spells. He punched the sorcerer and the armor turned to dust. The Thousand Suns are just dust inside armor. They are ghosts. Shazam cleared a path for Superman. Superman crashed into the tower. Dr. Fate was floating in the center. He was holding the fabric of reality together with his will. "You made a mistake, Kal-El," Dr. Fate said. His voice was two voices. "You opened the door to the darkness." "I know," Superman said. "How do I close it?" "You cannot," Fate said. "The corruption is too deep. Zod is lost. The planet is infected. The only way to save the universe is to sever the connection. We must separate the Earths." "But that will kill billions," Superman said. "The gravity alone will tear the planets apart." "It is better than the alternative," Fate said. "If the Tyranids feed on the Kryptonians, they will become unstoppable. If Chaos claims the power of the Speed Force, they will consume all realities. We must cut the limb to save the body." Superman refused. He said there had to be another way. Suddenly, a boom tube opened in the tower. Steppenwolf stepped out. He was the general of Darkseid. He was not from Earth or the 40K universe. He was from Apocalypse. Darkseid had been watching. Darkseid did not like other gods playing with his toys. Steppenwolf looked at the Chaos Marines outside. He looked at Zod burning the sky. He looked at the Tyranids eating the jungle. "Darkseid is not pleased," Steppenwolf said. "This world belongs to him. These interlopers are trespassing." The parademons flew out of the boom tube. Thousands of them. Now there were 4 armies. The Imperium, Chaos, the Tyranids, and the forces of Apocalypse. The Earth was no longer a planet. It was a battlefield for every horror in the cosmos. Superman flew back to the battle. He saw Zod holding Wonder Woman by the throat. Wonder Woman was beating him with her shield, but Zod did not feel pain anymore. He only felt rage. He was squeezing her neck. Superman tackled Zod. They crashed into the ocean. The water boiled around them. Zod laughed underwater. He summoned blood sharks from the warp to bite Superman. "You cannot win," Zod yelled. "The blood god is with me." Superman's eyes glowed. "I don't have a god. I have hope." He used his solar flare power. He expelled all the energy in his cells in one massive blast. It was like a miniature supernova. The heat vaporized the water for 50 miles. It burned the chaos flesh off Zod's bones. It blinded the sensors of the Tyranid hive ships in orbit. Zod screamed as the warp energy was burned away. He fell back, stunned. His armor was fused to his skin. He was defeated for a moment. But the cost was high. Superman fell to the beach. He was powerless. He was just a man now. He had used everything. He lay on the sand. He looked up at the sky. The sky was full of monsters. The Tyranid ships were descending. The chaos rifts were widening. The parademons were swarming. And then, from the dust of the ruined cities, the humans stood up. The Imperial Guard regiments had been broken. Their officers were dead, but the soldiers were still alive. They saw the monsters. They saw the alien horrors. They saw their enemy, the Justice League, fighting to save them. A sergeant of the Cadian 8th Regiment stood up. He had lost an arm. He picked up his laser gun. He looked at the Flash who was being carried out of the LexCorp factory by rebels. He looked at the powerless Superman on the beach. The sergeant realized something. The Emperor protects. But today, the Emperor was silent. These heroes were here. The sergeant rallied his men. "Fix bayonets," he screamed. The remaining Imperial Guard turned their guns away from the civilians. They turned them toward the demons and the aliens. They did not do it because they loved the Justice League. They did it because they hated the alien law. "For the Emperor and for Earth," the sergeant yelled. The humans of two worlds joined forces. It was a small choice, a choice by a simple soldier, but it changed the dynamic. The resistance was united. It ended with a planet in ruins, but a planet that was finally fighting together. However, the scale of the threat had become galactic. The Tyranids were beginning to digest the biomass. The clock was ticking. If they didn't separate the worlds or destroy the enemy in the next hour, there would be nothing left to save. Lex Luthor watched from his tower. He held the mother box. He looked at the chaos. He made a decision. He would not rule this world. He would have to save it. He began to calculate the firing solution for the Golden Throne. He wasn't going to signal anyone. He was going to use it as a bomb, a psychic bomb to wipe the board clean. "Checkmate," Luthor whispered. But in the shadows, something else stirred. The Necrons, disturbed by the Tyranid arrival, fully awoke. The Silent King had arrived, and he did not want to share his galaxy. The final convergence was approaching. The arrival of the Necrons changed the physics of the battlefield. The Silent King did not announce his presence with shouts or broadcasts. The flagship of the Sarikhan dynasty simply existed where there had been empty space a moment before. It was a crescent moon made of living metal. It was larger than the Phalanx. It was larger than the Watchtower. It was a tomb ship that had slept for 60 million years. The Necrons do not fight wars for territory. They fight to restore order. To them, the Tyranids are vermin. The Chaos Gods are a cancer. The humans are annoying children. The arrival of the Tyranids had triggered the awakening protocols of the tomb worlds buried deep within the crust of the Warhammer Earth. They rose not to save the humans, but to sterilize their property. Green lightning arced across the sky. It was not the magical lightning of Shazam. It was Gauss energy. It stripped matter apart atom by atom. The Tyranid bioships in the upper atmosphere were hit first. They did not explode. They dissolved. The massive organs and chitinous armor of the hive ships turned into green dust. The screams of the dying bioships echoed in the minds of every telepath on the planet. On the ground, the Necron immortals marched out of pyramids that pushed up through the asphalt of Central City. They were skeletons of chrome and green fire. They walked in perfect unison. They raised their Gauss blasters. They fired at the Tyranid swarms eating the Amazon rainforest. The gaunts were vaporized. The carnifexes were deconstructed. The Necrons did not stop. They did not run. They did not feel fear. They were the inevitable end of all things. But the Necron technology had a side effect. They deployed blackstone pylons. These were giant obelisks made of a stone that repelled the warp. They slammed into the ground in Gotham, Metropolis, and Themyscira. They began to hum. The frequency was designed to calm the Sea of Souls and close the warp rift. It worked. The purple tear in the sky above Gotham began to shrink. The demons of the Black Legion flickered and vanished. Chaos cannot exist where the Blackstone is active. General Zod, the Demon Prince, screamed. The warp energy fueling his mutation was cut off. He fell from the sky, his armor smoking, his god powers draining away. But the Blackstone did not just hurt Chaos. It hurt anything connected to the metaphysical. Wonder Woman fell to her knees. Her powers came from the Greek gods, who are entities of magic. The Blackstone suppressed that magic. She felt her strength fading. She became just a woman in armor. Shazam detransformed. The lightning left him. He was just Billy Batson, a scared boy in a war zone. The Flash, still trapped in the stasis pod in the LexCorp factory, began to convulse. The Speed Force is an extra-dimensional energy. The Necrons were damping all extra-dimensional energy. The Flash was being suffocated by the laws of physics. Superman stood on the beach. He was powerless from his solar flare. But even if he hadn't been, the pylons were making the air heavy. He watched the Necrons slaughter the Tyranids. He saw the cold logic of their solution. They would save the Earth from the aliens and the demons, but they would turn it into a graveyard. They would strip the souls from the humans to ensure chaos never returned. Then the boom tubes opened. Darkseid did not care about Necron pylons. He was a new god. His power did not come from the warp. It came from the source. He stepped onto the burning fields of Metropolis. He stood 10 feet tall. His skin was grey rock. His eyes burned with the Omega effect. Behind him came Kalibak and the Furies. Steppenwolf bowed to his master. "The insects are fighting each other, Lord," Steppenwolf said. Darkseid looked at the Silent King's ship. He looked at the retreating Chaos forces. He looked at the struggling humans. "This world is a mess," Darkseid said. His voice was the sound of tectonic plates grinding. "I will clean it." Darkseid fired his Omega beams. The zigzagging red energy sought out the Necron monoliths. The beams hit the living metal. The Necron metal tried to repair itself, but the Omega effect is entropy incarnate. The monoliths turned to ash. The Silent King turned his attention to this new threat. The war had become a four-way deadlock of cosmic horrors. The Tyranids were being eaten by the Necrons. The Necrons were being attacked by Darkseid. Chaos was being banished by the Blackstone, and the humans were caught in the crossfire. In the LexCorp tower, Lex Luthor and Magos Vorkas worked frantically. They had seen the Necron pylons. They knew what was happening. "The Necrons will sterilize the planet," Magos Vorkas said. His logical voice was devoid of panic, but the speed of his calculations showed his fear. "They will seal the warp rift, but they will also lobotomize the human race. They seek to turn us into pariahs, soulless husks. And Darkseid will turn us into slaves," Luthor said. He was welding a connection on a massive machine. "We have one chance. We have to separate the realities before they anchor." Luthor pointed to the Golden Throne. Not the real one on Terra, but the psychic conduit they had built using the Mother Box and the stolen Imperial tech. It was a chair made of circuitry in gold. It was designed to amplify psychic energy to a godlike degree. "We need a navigator," Vorkas said. "We need someone to guide the separation. The Emperor is silent. We have no psyker strong enough." Luthor looked at the stasis pod. He looked to the Flash. "We don't need a psyker," Luthor said. "We need a frequency. The two Earths are vibrating at different speeds. That's why gravity is going crazy. If we can hit the resonant frequency of the DC Earth, we can push it away. We can phase it out of this dimension. The subject will not survive," Vorkas stated. "The energy required to vibrate an entire planet will disintegrate his biological form." Luthor looked at the monitor. He saw Superman fighting a parademon with a piece of rebar. He saw Wonder Woman bleeding. He saw his city burning. "Do it," Luthor said. They opened the pod. The Flash fell out. He was weak. His skin was pale. Luthor grabbed him. He didn't apologize. He dragged Barry Allen to the chair. He strapped him in. "Listen to me," Luthor shouted over the sound of explosions outside. "You have to run. You have to run inside your mind. You have to vibrate the whole world." Barry looked at him. "It will kill me." "Yes," Luthor said, "but it will save everyone else." Barry closed his eyes. He thought of Iris. He thought of Wally. He thought of the friends he had lost. He nodded. Walkers activated the machine. The Mother Box whirred. It connected to the Flash's aura. It forced the Speed Force to ignite, fighting against the Necron dampeners. On the battlefield, the effect was immediate. The ground began to hum. It was a low vibration that shook the teeth of every living thing. Darkseid felt it. He stopped crushing a Necron Lich Guard. He looked at the tower. "They are trying to leave," he said. "Cowards." Darkseid flew toward the tower. He would not let his prize escape. Superman saw Darkseid moving. He saw where he was going. He knew Barry was in there. Superman looked at the Imperial Guard sergeant next to him. The sergeant was named Higgins. He was dirty, bloody, and missing an ear. "Sergeant," Superman said, "I need a lift." Higgins looked at the powerless god. He pointed to a Valkyrie gunship that had crashed nearby. The pilot was dead, but the engines were running. "Can you fly that?" Superman asked. "I can fly anything with wings, sir," Higgins said. They ran to the ship. Higgins gunned the engines. The Valkyrie lifted off. It smoked and rattled. Superman grabbed the side gun. It was a heavy bolter. "Get me to the tower," Superman said. "Ram it if you have to." The Valkyrie flew through the air war. Necron Doomsides were dogfighting with parademons. Higgins flew like a madman. He dodged green lightning and red fire. Darkseid was ahead of them. He was charging his Omega beams. He was aiming at the LexCorp tower. "Drop me," Superman yelled. Higgins banked the ship. Superman jumped. He fell through the air. He did not fly. He fell. He aimed his body at Darkseid. Darkseid saw the man falling. He laughed. A powerless Kryptonian was nothing. He raised his hand to backhand Superman into oblivion. But Superman was not alone. From the shadows of the ruin, a green light emerged. The Silent King had analyzed the threat matrix. He calculated that Darkseid was the primary variable preventing order. The Silent King raised his scepter of eternal glory. He did not fire at Darkseid. He fired at Superman. He infused Superman with a temporary surge of necrodermis energy. It was a nanotechnological boost. It coated Superman in living metal. For 10 seconds, Superman was not a man. He was a Catan shard in human shape. Superman hit Darkseid. The impact cracked the continental shelf. The metal-coated fist of the Man of Steel smashed into the rock face of the god of Apocalypse. Darkseid stumbled back. He looked at Superman with genuine surprise. "You ally with the soulless machines?" Darkseid spat. "I ally with survival," Superman said. His voice echoed with metallic resonance. He punched Darkseid again and again. He was buying time. Inside the tower, Barry Allen was screaming. The machine was tearing him apart. He was vibrating his molecules so fast he was becoming pure light. He pushed the vibration out. He pushed it into the bedrock of the Earth. The DC Earth began to phase. It became transparent. The buildings of Metropolis flickered. The people felt a wave of nausea. The Warhammer Earth remained solid. The 2 planets were unzipping. But the gravity was resisting. The mass of the Warhammer Earth was too great. The hive cities were anchoring them down. They needed a push. On the Warhammer Earth, inside the Imperial Palace, the Custodes stood guard around the real golden throne. The Emperor of mankind sat upon it. He is a corpse that is not dead. He is a god who is rotting. He saw what was happening. He saw the struggle of the heroes. He saw the sacrifice of the speedster. The Emperor cannot speak, but he can project. He projected a single thought across the void. It was not a command. It was a gift. He directed the light of the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that guides ships in the warp. He turned it. He focused the beam directly at the LexCorp tower. The golden light hit the tower. It merged with the lightning of the Speed Force. It was the psychic might of the master of mankind fueling the escape of the heroes. The energy overload was catastrophic. The LexCorp tower vaporized. Magos Vorkus was incinerated instantly. Lex Luthor had activated his personal teleporter seconds before, vanishing to a safe bunker. Barry Allen dissolved. He did not die. He became the lightning. He ran into the time stream. He ran so fast he exited the narrative. The push happened. With a sound like the universe cracking, the two Earths separated. The gravity well snapped. The DC Earth was thrown back into its own dimension. It took the Justice League, the villains, and the cities with it. The Warhammer Earth remained. It snapped back into its orbit around the sun of the 41st millennium. But the battlefield was not empty. Darkseid was left standing on the Warhammer Earth. He had been standing on the Imperial soil when the snap happened. He looked around. He saw the Necrons. He saw the Tyranids. He saw the Imperium. He was trapped in the grim darkness. And on the DC Earth, something had been left behind. Superman lay in the ruins of Metropolis. The Necron metal flaked off his skin. He was back in his own universe. The yellow sun was shining. His powers were returning. He sat up. He looked around. The city was destroyed. Millions were dead. But they were home. He looked down at his hand. Clutched in his grip was a piece of cloth. It was the banner of the Cadian 8th Regiment. The sergeant had given it to him before the end. Superman stood up. He heard the sirens. He heard the people coming out of the shelters. But then he heard a sound that made his blood freeze. It was a chittering sound. He looked at the Amazon rainforest. The Tyranids had not all been on the Warhammer Earth when the split happened. A hive splinter fleet had been consumed by the Necrons, but a single bioship had crashed in Brazil. And in the sewers of Gotham, the Joker was gone. But a single book bound in human skin lay in the darkness. The rift was closed, but the infection remained. The separation had worked, but the collision had left scars. On the Warhammer Earth, the situation was apocalyptic. Darkseid roared. He summoned his armies from the boom tubes. He would carve a new kingdom here. The Silent King watched him. The Tyranids regrouped. The Imperium mobilized every ship in the sector. Robert Gilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Macraga's Honor. He had just arrived in the system. He looked at the tactical plot. He saw a new god fighting Necrons on Holy Terror. Whatever that blue world was, Gilliman said, it has doomed us all. This ended not with peace, but with a shift in the eternal war. The DC universe had survived, but it was now infected with the seeds of the 41st millennium. The Warhammer universe had a new player in the great game. Darkseid was now a neighbor to Khorne. The epilogue would show the quiet horror of the aftermath. But the story of the collision was over. The story of the infection had just begun. Strategic analysis of the outcome. Casualties. Estimated 4 billion humans across both planets. Resource state. DC. Earth economy collapsed. Technology regression probable. Magic severely damaged by Blackstone exposure. Geopolitical state. The Imperium has lost significant fleet assets, but gained a new enemy. Darkseid. The Necrons are fully awake in the Sol system. Moral event horizon. The Justice League survived by sacrificing one of their own and accepting the help of a xenophobic empire and a fascist dictator. The moral clarity of the Golden Age is dead. The screen fades to black. The only sound is the ticking of a clock, which sounds suspiciously like the chittering of an insect. The rain fell on Metropolis for 40 days after the separation. It was not normal rain. It was grey and tasted like ash. The people did not use umbrellas. They walked through it with their heads down. They were alive, but they were not the same people they were before the sky tore open. They had seen monsters that defied science. They had seen angels that killed without mercy. The age of heroes was over. The age of survival had begun. In the center of the city, they built a memorial. It was not a statue of Superman. It was a wall of black stone. On it were the names of the 4 billion people who died. At the top of the list were 2 names that stood out: Bruce Wayne, Barry Allen. There were no bodies to bury. Batman was dust in another dimension. The Flash was a ghost in the time stream. Superman stood in front of the wall. He did not wear his bright colors. His suit was dull blue. He wore a black armband. It was the cloth given to him by the Imperial Guard sergeant. Superman did not float above the people anymore. He stood on the ground with them. He realized that being a god was not enough. You had to be a soldier. He looked at Wonder Woman. She was leaning on a cane. Her immortality was returning slowly, but she was scarred. She had seen the fanaticism of the Sisters of Battle. She knew now that faith could be a weapon of hate. She would never look at a prayer the same way again. Lex Luthor sat in his bunker. He was the man who saved the world. The news channels called him a savior. He did not smile. He looked at the data he had stolen from the Mechanicus. He looked at the designs for the Bolters and the Titans. He began to draw new plans. He knew the truth. The aliens were not gone forever. The universe was bigger and darker than they thought. He ordered his factories to stop making phones and cars. He ordered them to start making weapons that could kill gods. Deep in the Amazon rainforest, the trees were changing. A village of local tribesmen had gone silent. No one went to check on them because the world was too busy rebuilding the cities. If someone had gone, they would have seen the horror. The trees were not made of wood anymore. They were made of bone and muscle. The crash site of the single Tyranid bioship was pulsing. It was birthing new creatures. These creatures did not have a connection to the hive mind in space. They were feral. They were adapting to the DNA of Earth. They ate the jaguars and the snakes. They grew stronger. They learned to hide. The infection had taken root. In the sewers of Gotham City, a homeless man found a book. It was bound in human skin. He opened it. He did not read the words. The words read him. He started to giggle. The giggle sounded like the Joker, but deeper. The portal was closed, but the idea of chaos cannot be killed. The corruption of the soul is a slow poison. The man walked into the darkness, whispering promises to gods he did not understand. On the other side of reality, the war did not stop. The Warhammer Earth was a ruin. The Emperor sat on his throne, silent as always, but the Sol system was crowded. Darkseid had claimed the planet of Mars. He had killed the Fabricator General. He turned the Red Planet into a new apocalypse. He sat on a throne of skulls that rivaled the one in the warp. He looked at the Imperial fleet gathering to attack him. He smiled. He enjoyed this universe. Here, there was only war. It was home. Robert Gilliman looked at the strategic map. He had a new enemy, a new god who could match him in strength. The Tyranids were regrouping on the edge of the system. The Necrons were fortifying the moon. The Primarch felt a weight on his shoulders that was heavier than his armor. He realized that the collision had not been a random event. It was a test, and they were failing. The chronicler closed the file. The history of the collision was written. It was not a story of victory. It was a warning. When two worlds collide, the cracks never truly heal. The DC Earth was safe for now, but it had lost its innocence. It had learned the grim lesson of the 41st millennium. In the dark future, there is no peace. There is only the preparation for the next war. And in the jungle, the chittering grew louder. The end was not an event. The end was a process, and it was already underway.